in the Madison County Public School Library materials. So that is what we are working on. You'll see a copy of it, and I know that it was posted with our agenda so that all of you hopefully have had a chance to look at it so far. This is a document in process. It is a draft that we are working on. And I know sometimes some of the things that we do and say may not make a lot of attention because we are working out loud while we're trying to figure things out. And so it sometimes may seem we're going this way and then it looks like we're going that way. But it's an important policy, and there are lots of components to it. So we want to take it seriously and make sure that we do the right thing for the right reasons. So, Mr. Wingate?
Good evening. I just want to hit that kind of highlight kind of some of the key points of this policy, and as Ms. Allen said, this is a draft. It's the first time that's kind of being publicized here, and so fully expect it'll get better over the course before we vote on it the next month or the following months, whenever that is. I'm not going to go over the whole thing. Just want to say a couple of things about it. This is for library materials. There's a separate policy for instructional materials that we're going to vote on tonight, I believe. This is focused on library things, and basically it's based on two things. It's my belief, and I think many of the board members' belief, that our schools ought to be reliable partners with parents as they execute their right to protect their children from accessing sexually explicit content through school resources. This is only about school resources, and parents who desire to have their children access anything have us fully able to do that. When I reviewed the books in the library, I was able to pull up the books I was worried about very, very quickly, in seconds, on the internet for free. And so any parent who wants to do that can certainly do that. But my belief is, and this draft policy's belief is that it's not appropriate for those resources to be in the library where your 14-year-old son or daughter can browse through shelves and find things that are certainly adult material, for sure. And secondly, I believe it's unfair for Madison taxpayers to be asked to fund these things that many find obscene. And some may not, and that's fine, but many certainly in Madison do, and so it's not fair to ask them to fund morally objectionable materials in the schools. So basically, that's the argument that the policy makes, is that we won't have that content in the schools, and where it is found in the schools, the school board has a right to say it's not appropriate to have it in those schools, and parents who wish to have that, their parental rights certainly is valid, and they can go to the public library or do it online, or Amazon is amazing. You can have Amazon and have the book there in 2 days if you so desire. I think there'll be time for questions about the policy. Is it right to have the superintendent be the person who does it? I think is one of the questions we got to kind of figure out as a board. How sort of the details of that work. We've had some conversation about it. I think we're still kind of working through the details of that. The policy also talks about screening of new criteria. One of the problems is that libraries use a subscription service, and so a lot of times they're getting things from the American Library Association. And as somebody said earlier, we, I think here in Madison, don't want to be governed by big organizations out of New York or California or somewhere. And so we want to be careful about making sure that we have a screening criteria in place so that when we do get bulk shipments of books, that we're making sure that there's not explicit content in there, and that we have a vehicle to get rid of those things. And so the policy talks about that a little bit, and then there's a definition of sexually explicit. I think is certainly can be made better, but it's thought through to try to make it very, very clear what it is. One of the objections we've heard certainly is that if you do this, and you're going to throw out Shakespeare and Chaucer in the Bible, and I think just common sense shows that if there's a definition that says we know that those things are very, very different. They mention sexual activity certainly, but they're not graphic in detail, and we have common sense enough to say that there's a difference between Chaucer and Shakespeare and some of the content we're talking about. I don't know if any more, so I think that's an overview of the content. I don't know if the board has any questions about it.
I just have one question about superintendent or designee. So just in case Ms. Graham decides to get hit by the lottery or something like that, we don't have to come back and change the whole policy because she's, you know, not here or whatever. So superintendent or designee, I would advise. Do you want, like, I wrote notes on mine, do you want that to?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Come.
Sure. I think it's a good idea. We can add that in there for sure.
So, there you go.
Damon, did you? I'm sorry. Mr. Myers? Mr. Chief?
I wish that I could take credit for doing this kind of stuff. Mr. Wingate's sort of, he's really kind of moved the waters out of the course on this. I've read through it. It looks good the way it is. I'm not disagreeing with what Ms. Collier said. I hope Ms. Graham is with us for a long time. She's very, very, very good at doing what
I
she
didn't
does.
insinuate that.
But yeah, please don't play the lottery, especially the Powerball. Anyhow, I'm for this the way it is, and I'm sure if we can make some adjustments, I'll be for it as well. But I'm absolutely 100% behind keeping this stuff out of Madison County schools and away from children.
So when I look at this, and I have gone through it paragraph by paragraph, I do have some questions about how things are going to play out in reality when the policy actually goes into effect, if it does, or when it does. The first one is the school board shall initiate the review of library materials that are suspected of sexually explicit content by directing the superintendent to examine each identified portion of the library material containing sexually explicit content and make a determination if the content is sexually explicit as defined in this policy. And then it says the superintendent, within 1 month of the school board direction, shall make this determination and notify the board and the public at the next public school board meeting if the reviewed material contains sexually explicit content. I'm just a little confused about, it says the school board shall initiate, so we could say, you can help me here because your words, or kind of your words, I just don't understand how is the superintendent going to review all of the sexually, I mean, how is she supposed to know what's in all these books? And that's what I just don't understand, because there may be some books that have been pointed out to the public and to us by you, but there's probably other books that need to be looked at as well. There may be. So I don't understand how she's going to find those passages. And I think it goes on to say that we're going to bring those passages to her attention. I don't know how I'm going to know what passages are in books to bring to her attention. And it puts all the responsibility on the school board members to find those excerpts and give them to the superintendent so that she can decide if those passages are sexually explicit. So I'm confused about, as a member of the board, I don't know how we are supposed to find those passages. Now, not thinking beyond the 26th, but in other cases too. There's a lot of books in the library, and I just don't understand how that can happen.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I've certainly talked to the principals and librarians and the superintendent about is trying to minimize the workload. We're not trying to pile stuff on the principals and the librarians, and so I think there's been a couple of iterations of this draft policy, and I think the fact that it ended up on the school board is right. I mean, we're the ones who are responsible ultimately, and so instead of putting that onus on the principals and the librarians, I think that the board is probably the right one to say, take a look at these books. So I'm trying to protect the principals and librarians from having to scrub through library shelves. There's no expectation in this policy that anybody's scrubbing through these library shelves and finding stuff. I think, in my mind, these are the books that we've identified are the ones that I'm kind of most concerned about. And so I don't foresee there's no requirement in this policy for us to go through scrubbing through the library shelves. I think when it's brought to our attention, I mean, we're elected representatives, when a parent brings the books like this to our attention, I think it is our due diligence to go and find out. But I think that's that's kind of the mechanism for this. We or a parent brings it to our attention and says, okay, here's an issue. We as a board look at it, we vote and say, okay, this is an issue. And we, if it's a majority vote, then say to the superintendent, please take a look at this book we think meets this policy. So I think in my mind, and again, I'm ready to make it better, but in my mind, it kind of finds a sweet spot between minimizing workload, but also providing us as representatives of the people with a vehicle to sort of identify books. And then for the superintendent, I make it very clear, we do not expect anybody to read all the books. One of the complaints has been, well, there's context, et cetera. I think it's very true for adult readers. But for 14-year-old readers, context in many ways doesn't matter, especially obscene material. A 14-year-old child's not ready to handle context of some of the other stuff in these books. And so the policy very clearly says that the superintendent is not required to read the whole books. They can read the section that we identify and make a common sense application of the sexually explicit definition that's in the policy. Does that make sense?
It does. The only thing I was thinking is we have been a board that has supported the parents' right to get involved. But what I read kind of put it on us. It said the school board in conjunction with parents. I mean, I don't know how to word it, but it just seems like the way it's worded right now, it all comes down to the school board finding these excerpts and has nothing to do with the parents. Or I can't see it. Maybe that's my concern.
I think it's good. I can make it more clear. I think it's a good concern. I can make it more clear that parents obviously have the right to notify the school board when there's an issue. And the school board then can take a look at it. So I certainly think that's within kind of the idea. So I can make that more explicit though.
Yeah, I just think the way I'm reading it, it kind of says we're the beginning and the end of finding these books, and I think that's a pretty lofty.
Yeah, I think it's a good valid point. I think we're the end, but we don't
The end,
we're not the beginning. I don't think.
Right. So, and that would be the concern that I have. I think parents still need to be able to contact us with information. And I think that the policy that we had before was pretty much parent generated. And I think now we've written a policy that I didn't see parents having any opportunity to say, I found this book, my child brought this book home, and this is what I read in it. So, I mean, I don't know. I guess we're gonna have to do you guys see what I'm saying, or?
I see what you're saying, but in no way, shape, or form does this say that a parent can't tell the school board that they found some sexually explicit material in the book, and it says the school board shall initiate. It doesn't say that parents can't bring to the school board.
I'm not making that
I
argument.
think
What
you're
I'm
splitting
saying
hairs,
is,
but
well, what I'm saying is, if we're going to have, if you're gonna write a policy, you're gonna have to go by the policy. And this policy kind of maybe could include information that comes from parents, not just what we find on our own. That's all I'm saying.
So I hear you. I think it's fine. It's good. I mean, the section 5 is all about parental rights, and so they can add a blurb in there in section 5 that parents. I mean, I know, from my experience on the board last year, parents have no trouble contacting me about issues.
That's
A
true.
lot. So we certainly get a lot of word from them, and I think we'll continue to do that. But I can add a line in there. I think about parents have the right and the responsibility to contact school members, board members, if they have concerns. I think that would meet your concern.
Nina, is there anybody else? I mean, I'm not trying to split hairs. I'm just trying to include other people other than just the school board, and I think that's important. And contacting us would be the way to start.
I mean, I think it's fine, and you have I wrote edits on a piece of paper so he could incorporate those. The biggest one was superintendent designee and/or committee, whatever we want to call it. But just to make sure we can cover, she decides to take a 6-week vacation or something. We have to make a decision, you know.
6 hours.
Or something. There's always something. But yeah, I think, you know, again, this is the draft and the first read.
Right.
So we, you know, sort of hand in our comments and we go from there.
And I think, you know, your question on here, does this contradict KBL, is an important point, because, you know, we're making a distinction between, there's a policy that says parents can object to a policy, and this, you know, that stays the same. We may adjust it a little bit to account for this, but the policy, this policy is of the school board. The school board is different than an individual parent, and so those two policies, I don't think it contradicts it at all, because they're two separate entities. And so, you know, there's protest about, you know, the board doing something, the board, you know, the legal, this has gone through legal review and legal team, and it says the school board superintendent have the right to make these decisions for the good of the community. It's our responsibility to do that, our right and our responsibility. So I don't think it contradicts KBO at all.
And there's one typo, I think, on the back page.
You're welcome. Could I add just a couple things? Maybe that first section, in section 2, part A, with the school board initiating the review, it might be more streamlined for parents if it was similar to policy KLB, so they know that they could notify their librarian or their principal. So some of the questionable materials as they pop up, if it funneled through us first, it wouldn't necessarily be at a meeting that you all are telling me about it. It might be me saying, hey, this book came up this month and we want you to know that it was against the criteria set out in section 4 and that we're thinking this might be a book that is set aside. So maybe like kind of let parents know that it doesn't have to necessarily go through you all, that it can just go through the channel that they already knows in place.
Okay, I can add something like that.
I think one of the problems that we've had, and all of us have said it, we don't see each other but once a month. And I think with you being able to take information from parents and deal with it quickly and be able to get it to us so that we can take a look at it, probably would be good, because you're, you know, boots on the ground every day. So, if that's an option,
I think that sounds good. And speaking with librarians, they did point out that it would be easier for them to update a list of new acquisitions monthly, because they do get new books, so they could keep something rolling like that on the internet for everyone on our website.
Okay.
And then a great suggestion from Ms. Wood, the librarian, was to keep a running list of books that have been removed, so that future librarians or staff members don't accidentally purchase those books again. So just keep a list so the public can see any book that's been removed.
well, and it goes on as well to say that if a book has been removed, it can be challenged to be put back in. Am I reading that incorrectly?
It says if the book is retained, the parent can challenge it through, I think, that policy, KLB, or I can't remember that acronym, is it KLB or DBL or whatever that is?
KLB.
KLB, thank you. So it says if it's been retained, then the parent has that right to challenge it.
Oh, you mean if a book, they can't challenge it if a book is taken out? So if a book is taken out, it's the end for that book, and you cannot have a parent want to say, well, wait a minute.
Right, because the policy, and the reason why is because the policy does not ask for there to be a committee or the superintendent to read the entire book, because the whole idea is that the context to a 14-year-old doesn't matter very much. It's obscene, it's explicit, it shouldn't be there. And so if you put in there something the book can be reviewed, if it's kicked out, then you're asking us all, because they all will, I mean, every single book that is removed will be challenged. You kind of know that. And so you're asking us to read all those books, which is, in my opinion, is not necessary, because the explicit content makes it inappropriate for a 14-year-old child, no matter what. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't read through all of the books. I'm reading one right now, and there are little pockets of things that come up. But I really have to sit down and think about whether that information is enough to apply this policy to. I don't know, because the policy hasn't been used before, so trying to read what I'm reading right now and trying to reconcile that with how we would use this policy. And I know that sounds confusing, and sometimes I get confused with it too. But I do think we're taking this very seriously and trying to write a policy that we're going to be living with for quite a while. So thank you for your effort in trying to put together something so that it's a draft right now. And I think it helps to have a conversation so that things get explained. Sometimes when I read them and think about it, I'm not really sure what exactly is meant. So,
Anna, do you have another clip that's the end of your comments? A few other ones?
Only that, again, in section 2, if I've just kind of like what Ms. Allen was saying, if I've read through a book and I feel like it doesn't quite fit this policy, then in that instance, for F, the board, if I'm reading this right, the board's gonna say, okay, it stays, and then someone else would have to follow KLB to try to get it removed, correct?
Right, and that would be a much more in-depth
Okay,
reading, right? Because KLB,
KLB,
KLB requires that in-depth
okay.
reading. So, I think the reason for that, I think, is those gray areas. You know, there might be some gray areas. I think, you know, just for those, for example, those 26 books, I think 22 of them is very easy and clear that they're explicit content and inappropriate. There are probably 3 or 4 that are kind of gray. And so your determination, I think, would be final. If a parent came back and said, you know what, that's really not appropriate, then I think a fuller reading of those books would be appropriate under that KLP policy. Does that make sense?
oh, and the other thing, and you and I had spoken about this actually, I had asked you a question before the meeting started about the disposal of the books. If we could take another look at what happens if a book meets the criteria and is banned. I know we have certain policies about what we do with the materials and how they are disposed of. So, we could take a look at that.
I'm open to whatever, however we remove them from Madison County Public Schools. I'm happy to get them out of the schools, because I think that protects our children and protects parental rights. So, do you have a recommendation on?
No, not at this point. Maybe one of you guys do, but I think we have to be very careful about saying that we're going to donate them to another library. I agree.
So there is a surplus property
Right.
policy. So maybe we say, in accordance with policy, I don't know what it is right now, surplus property policy, we'll follow that. I'm looking for it.
And that's one thing that we do. We've never done this before, so it's hard to know exactly what we would do with them. I just think we need to be careful by saying in the policy that we're going to donate them to the library.
That's a good,
To another library.
that's a good point. I think we can just say something on surplus property or something. Okay. I'll try. I'll figure out what that is and make a suggestion.
So we're not ready to do
It is DN, disposal of surplus items. DN.
So I guess, I think what I propose on the way ahead is I'll make these, try to incorporate all these ideas, continue to receive them, and then can provide an updated draft to everybody, see what you think, and then based on how happy people are with that, vote on it whenever, over the next month or 2 months, whatever that is. That's fine.
board decision. That sound okay? Okay. To be continued. So the next section, under business information, is exploring additional security measures, and I believe that was something that Mr. Sheeds was curious about, and so I'll let him take it from there.
Yes, so, because we want the community to be involved on the meeting as an agenda item. And it would be good when people like to come down and bash us with their comments to stick around so we can explain something to them. However, I don't know if y'all can, I know you can't read that. I'll read it for you. As part of the school safety response, Board Member Sheeds would like to discuss the idea of trained and proficient school staff having the opportunity and responsibility to carry concealed firearms on school property during school activity hours. He would like the division superintendent to survey school staff to see if there is considerable interest or willingness, and if so, survey the community to gather their feedback on the proposal. Currently, state law prohibits firearms on school property, except for law enforcement, but this law could change. But should this law change, Board Member Sheeds would like for the school board to know if this could be an option for Madison County Public Schools or not. I think that's pretty clear. So my intent was to have Mrs. Graham send out a questionnaire, survey to all school staff, just to kind of see what their mindsets were, see how they felt about it. If we don't have teachers that would like to carry a firearm to protect children in school, I would never make them carry a firearm to protect children in school. Now, I will say that one lady got up and said that the most deadly thing that our children face is guns in this world, and that is absolutely not true. That was a straight up lie. And abortion is, and I dare say this, most people that are against guns are for abortion. Keep that in mind.
So, this is a topic that I don't know that the board is ready to commit to anything other than, I know that Superintendent Graham does surveys all the time. So in trying to find out just information, I mean, it is prohibited right now. So, you know, I think maybe, I mean, I don't know, what do you guys think or want to do? It's not my decision to make.
I'm not saying that Mrs. Graham needs to do as I'm asking her to do. If y'all would like her not to, I mean, it's okay. This isn't a requirement. This is just an idea. It's not my idea. Some of the parents, obviously, that aren't here tonight have brought it up to me because they've seen it done in other schools. And I know there was a lot of evidence-based data presented. But the issue is not the guns. The issue is the psychological state of the person using the gun, number one.
Right.
So, and as Matt from Rochelle or wherever it was in Madison mentioned, you know, we do have a lot of people pushing the First Amendment and how important that is, and I agree completely, 100%. And the second one is right there with it when the first one doesn't work. So we have lots of people that they like one amendment but not the other, and it doesn't work that way.
I guess,
I'm sorry, we do have some time, though, because right now we have time to get information, because right now it is against state law. So, you know, depends on when the time comes, when the right time comes.
Yes. I don't like for things to happen and then be behind the eight ball, and trying to get something figured out. So I like to have discussions ahead of time and figure it out. It's a good idea to make sure the public was aware.
I guess, I mean, Mrs. Graham, could it be incorporated into one of your monthly surveys? And I think make it very clear that right now this is, you know, this is not legal in Virginia. We're just kind of trying to explore options to get out. Make that very clear so nobody thinks it's going to happen tomorrow. And ask that question. And that might, you know, maybe there's no interest in it, and then that would give us an idea. Maybe there's a whole lot of interest. That would give us an idea of options. Is that doable? So maybe that's the direction we could take as a board.
Yeah, I mean, I think once we get back that information, having the security team available and, you know, we look at the data and making sure we are holistically, you know, making sure security is utmost important.
Ready to move on?
I think Ms. Graham has the ability to send that out, incorporate that whenever you feel appropriate. Is that, are you okay with that, Mr. Chief?
Okay, let's move on. Under business information, ESSER funding update.